Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Outsourcing Oasis. Today we have Matt Bader from Exam Master. He's the CEO there. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Hi, David. Good to be here. How are you?
Great, thank you. And I'm David from Blue Coding. I'm going to be your host today. Charles couldn't make it, so I hope this is a good conversation.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Right now, I'm the president and CEO of Exam Master. Loosely speaking, you could call us an educational technology company. What we do is provide resources for graduate level health professions, and that's mainly around the area of assessment and testing systems. So we provide online testing systems for schools to use for their students, and then we provide a variety of resources for board preparation and licensure exams. So I'm the president and CEO. I've been at the helm of Exam Master for about 17 years, and it's hard to believe it has been that long. I first started with the company in more of a sales and marketing role, and at that time we were very small. I think we had maybe 5 employees. Mm-hmm. And then I sort of, with a small company, there certainly can be opportunities to move up, especially if you're willing to work 60 or 80 hours a week, as I was. And so over time, I became the president and the CEO, and have been leading the company in that capacity probably for about 12 or 13 years.
Oh, that's great.
It's been a good run. I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Resolve Digital helps build, optimize, and maintain e-commerce, SaaS, and other products built on Ruby on Rails. They can help build new applications from scratch, rescue projects in bad shape, provide ongoing development and maintenance for existing projects, augment your existing team with experienced Rails developers. They also specialize in Solidus and Spree commerce solutions. Go check them out at resolve.digital.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a ton of work. So, Matt, you and I have known each other for, I think, maybe, I'd like to say 5 years, potentially.
Yes, which is amazing in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. We actually had Rory, who introduced us on the show. I think he's on this probably the second episode that we're gonna be putting out.
Great.
Yeah. And yeah, so Matt, we were discussing that maybe you could just tell us a little bit about Exam Master from a technology perspective. Do you want to start off with that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Our original mission was helping medical students prepare for something called the United States Medical Licensing Exam, the USMLE. And medical students and medical residents, they have to take 3 of these exams in order to become a physician. So they take one after the second year of medical school, one at the end of medical school, and then they have to take the third step while they're in the residency. And you absolutely cannot practice medicine unless you can pass all 3. So we developed a question bank resource to help these students prepare for the exam by taking practice exams, giving them the ability to create practice exams, assess, what their strengths and weaknesses are, dive into particular areas that they want to study and review, with the goal of helping them feel like they're better prepared and are better prepared for the exam. So back then, this was back in 1995 when we started this all. And so back then, very different world. Computer software was basically sold in packages. Computer software was often purchased in stores off of a shelf.
I remember that.
A completely different world. And so, our initial product was a CD-ROM. And it was a CD-ROM that had an exam engine, kind of a core exam engine, and then it had a database of test questions. The two were married together. It was actually pretty sophisticated. We hired someone who had set up the testing system for the National Association of Securities Dealers back then, and someone who also had experience in setting up the technology for betting machines used at casinos. So we had someone who was very good in terms of database management, maybe less somewhat of a front-end developer, but really being able to use, I think it was Microsoft Visual Basic, putting everything into one CD-ROM. And what was unique about our product was, one, it had thousands of questions, so there was a lot there. And two, it gave the user the ability to create fairly customized assessments. So back then, some of these products on CD-ROM, it was more of a fixed exam. So you go in there and you might have 2 or 3 practice tests. Whereas this thing was, it had some intelligence to it. It had a dynamic exam engine to it. It had a pretty sophisticated database connected to it. And so individuals could, create these practice exams. But, there was a whole infrastructure around that we had to develop. So we had to develop a unlocking system. How do you distribute these CDs and protect them, and then give those who actually buy them the ability to unlock them? So that was a real challenge that we had to try to solve. We had to maintain a database of test questions, and we needed a system for keeping those updated. We needed a system for paying royalties to our authors, because the amount of royalties they received was dependent on how many questions were in each product and what the proportion was. So we had to set up this whole infrastructure around this CD product, and then we distributed through medical bookstores. So that's where students went to buy their software, their practice software. They would go to these medical bookstores. So we distributed everything through them. So it was originally a CD-ROM product. We expanded into other health professions. And then about 4 or 5 years later is when we really started looking at the internet and how could we create an online system. So we like, well, folks were starting to think about the internet and how that might work for their business. So beyond pet food and some of the crazy stuff that was out there, it was legitimate for us to say, could we move from a fixed medium model to more of a subscription-based model that was available online. So that was we transitioned. And then there was a period where we had both CD-ROM and online capability, as one was sort of ebbing down, the other was gearing up. And that presented all sorts of challenges, because then we were managing 2 separate sets of technologies.
Yeah. So you were doing subscriptions back, what was this, like 2002, something like that?
Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think I even thought of subscriptions until like 10 years later, probably.
Yeah. Now I'll tell you. Yeah, it was a challenge. We were ahead of the time. One issue for us was that the internet bandwidth really wasn't robust enough to support some of the online things that people were trying to do.
It was all dial-up back then, right?
It was dial-up or, whatever that one step up from that was at the time, but not really that good.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the technology management, for both our original CD-ROM and our online testing system, we essentially outsourced the entire work. But there wasn't a team of developers or a team of software engineers. It was really just one person developed our CD-ROM. We relied on him almost exclusively to do the work. And then we had one guy who developed our online system using a proprietary web development system. So we really completely outsourced everything. We had no in-house capability at all in software development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about the web version of this? How was that built?
Yeah. Basically, I can't get into too much detail just from my lack of not being a software engineer, but basically what we wanted to be able to do was create an analog to the CD-ROM system and make it available online, so that users could go in, create practice exams, get scoring feedback, access hundreds or thousands of questions. So a similar user experience, except that it was available under a subscription basis rather than as a fixed medium.
What was this built on?
Something called HTML OS, which was a scripting language not commonly used. The gentleman who worked with us was well versed in it. He presented to the company that he could put together an online testing platform using this resource much more quickly than using something more traditional.
I don't think I had heard of that.
Yeah, it's not very commonly known, but he did actually do it. So, I would say that in the short to medium term, it was a good decision for the business. Eventually, it became a legacy problem. There were limitations to it. Eventually, we had to just migrate out of it completely, and then we went to Ruby on Rails and Ruby. That's much further down the road. But the system as it was set up, the other thing besides just the subscription model was it enabled us to then market resources to institutions. So in addition to having individual licenses, we could license the resource to, let's say, a medical library, and then they could make a collection of our resources available to their constituents. So it ended up opening this other business model that was not possible with CD-ROM. So now we had networking capability. We could have multi-user, access, different type of licensing. So really our business shifted from one where it was retail and user subscription model to much more predominantly licensing of the content to institutions and particularly medical libraries. And that was a pretty successful area for us for about 5 or 6 years, where we really were able to grow the business in that market because we had that online capability.
Right. So the first online version, this was built by somebody external to your company. At what time? Yes. At what point did you start, bringing in in-house developers?
We started bringing in in-house developers. I would say it was about 5 or 6 years after the initial release of the system. One of the concerns that we had with this this one person that we outsourced to, he's a very good person, but he was only one person. So if he was unavailable, we were pretty much stuck. If he had something else he had to do, if he had to travel, had to go away. I remember there was a period where he had to go out to Hawaii to work on a project. His availability was quite limited. That really kind of put us in a pickle. So there was the issue of having that single person there relying on when, that put the business at some risk. But then we also had some of the limitations of the platform. The front end was not particularly elegant. It looked like a system that was developed by an engineer for engineers, so to speak. So, we over time, there was limits as to the table sizes. There was different constraints. And we just realized eventually we needed to get away from that. And so after doing some research, we made the decision back in 2009, 2010 to move to a Rails setup.
Okay. And then when you started with Rails, how did that happen? I mean, did you build it yourselves? Did you?
We basically we did that's when we really started more of a hybrid development approach. We had a couple of folks in house, but then we also relied on a couple of folks who were quote unquote experts in Rails, expert in Rails implementations. So it really became sort of a mixture, primarily relying on folks outside the business. And really what we had to do was think about how do we rewrite the application to have the similar functionality, but to be on a different platform, essentially, different infrastructure. So, initially we thought about when we migrate over to Rails, do we want to do all sorts of feature enhancements? And we thought, that's a lot to take on, migrating the whole system and trying to do all these updates. So we decided, let's just try to replicate what the current system does, some minor fixes and improvements, get it over to Rails, and then look at our product development cycle once we've done that. The challenge was the database schema. So there were certain constraints built into the original system based on assumptions that were made, based on the fact that it was originally for retail end users. There was a number of constraints within the original system that we had to try to unwind. And so we really had to it was almost like taking a house, taking it all apart, and then having to build it to look like a different house with the same materials. It was difficult to do. And so that was one of the major challenges. And then we had to migrate all the client data, all the users. So it was a huge job. It took us 3 years to do it.
Wow. Yeah. That's the kind of thing that when you describe it, if you had described that to me before starting, I'd be like, maybe you want to rethink it. Maybe there's a way of, not having to do that.
Yes. Yeah. Doing things over again, there's certainly maybe some things I would have done differently. I think there was a little bit of naivete about Rails. And some of the folks that came to us said, hey, certain things are going to be really easy once you move to Rails, and they weren't quite so easy. But overall, I think it served us pretty well. Had we to do it over again, there would be some things.
Yeah.
But
you are where you are. And
we pulled it off. We pulled it off. Luckily, and So that's that.
Yeah, and you're still on Rails, a much newer version.
Yes,
fortunately.
yes, we are. Fortunately, yeah, we won't talk about that.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we're on Rails 1.9. No, we've moved up in the world.
Yeah.
Then we ended up having, and because it went to more of an in-house development model, so we had a small team at Exam Master. We had, kind of a software architect / engineer. We had a database programmer. We had a product owner. We had, I think, maybe a part-time developer. We had a software tester. So then we went and had an in-house team for a number of years, until what we're doing now, which is mostly outsourcing.
Right. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that transition, and I guess you were a CEO at that point already, right?
Yes.
What did that transition of let's move from, outsourcing most of our software development to bringing it in-house, what were the challenges for you? What were the concerns? Can you just tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, what was going on there?
Well, as a CEO who doesn't have an engineering background, the challenge partly is teasing out the technical issues in terms of what's involved in whatever kind of transition or project that you're doing involving technology. You need to rely on the folks that are working with you and to try to get them to answer the questions in a way that's useful for you. Trying to get a handle on the scope of a project such as that. I mean, it was a huge project doing the transition from HTMLS to Rails. Trying to get a handle on, even projecting what the cost might be for something like that. It was just exceedingly difficult. We worked through it, but it was definitely a challenge, especially from someone in my position where, we're not only a technology company, we're a content company. So part of our business is developing the software, but, we also focus on developing the content. So we have to kind of allocate resources across both domains in order to keep our products moving forward. So that's the other challenge is, you only have so much money to work with. You can't put it all into your technology if you want to, not keep up with your content and keep that fresh, keep that marketable. So you're really trying to allocate between the two domains, at least in our particular business.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting because when I think of businesses like Exam Master, not your product is not software. Your product is the content and the ability to learn from it. And software is the way you deliver it, right?
Yes, pretty much. Yep.
And so it's, I guess it's...
we don't really think of ourselves as a software development company.
Right, that's right.
There was a time when we may have said that, but really it's more of an educational company, no question about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. But I think it's interesting from the perspective of, do I want to have this work being done in-house? I was having a conversation with somebody recently, and we were talking about, what this potential upcoming recession might mean for us.
Right.
And this is a close friend who also runs an agency, and he said, what I've seen is during the good times, companies tend to bring everything in-house. And then when things start to slow down, they start to realize, hey, we actually don't do this so well. It might be a good time to think about outsourcing it. And so, that's something that we're expecting to see, coming up maybe in the next year or two, is companies that had built a larger team for development in-house start to say, well, we're actually not a development company. We're a content or another service company, and maybe we should start to outsource at least some of the non-core elements of our software.
Yeah, and it comes down also, and this is something I'm sure Rory would talk about because he mentions it often, is business value. Is focusing your time and resources on software development, is that the best use of, do you add enough value in that area, or can someone else really do it better, more efficiently than you can? And if someone else can do it better, more efficiently than you can, maybe that's the direction you need to go in, so that you can focus your core team on what you do best. For us, we had a couple of different issues. One, we had, legacy issues with respect to the code. We had, folks who had been working with the code for quite some time and maybe were sort of boxed in terms of their thinking. Sometimes it's good to get a fresh perspective. So for us, moving from in-house to more of partnering, and I'd like to look at it as partnering with an external company. Outsourcing, I think, has a negative connotation in some ways, but partnering with an external company, it can open up some opportunities to really look at things differently and get past some of the legacy issues. So we had some things that it was difficult for us to make the transition to partnering with an external company because we were sort of locked into some things with the existing team. But we took steps to really try to break that and to move on, and we have succeeded in doing that, fortunately.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I'm thinking about with Exam Master is I have had a chance to have these conversations with you and your team before, but yours is not a simple system. This is not just one piece of one simple code base. I don't remember exactly, but I know you have a number of different products and also internal services that talk to each other and interact in different ways.
Right.
And some of it is, some of it was built before, some of it is newer, and they're maybe in interacting in different ways. And so, keeping that, I guess I'm thinking is bringing in an external partner into that is probably pretty difficult. And I'm thinking about it just because, there's a lot of in-house knowledge and just know-how that's been accumulated. And so how do you transfer that?
Yeah, it is a process. And when we did begin working with Resolve Digital, we probably spent a year or more just trying to work through legacy issues. And those legacy issues still come up, in terms of features that don't work properly or bugs that develop, and then they end up being tied into some of the infrastructure and some of the architecture of the system, and that has to get all untangled. So it takes time. It really does.
Yeah.
And then you have the issue of code documentation, and can someone jumping into the code really understand what's going on? Is the code written in a way that makes sense to others or not?
Yeah, so I'm working on this little product on my weekends. It's called Simple Contract Manager, and I think I might have mentioned it to you. But it's the gist of it was we had too many agreements and they were hard to find. And I was, the search in Google Drive didn't work, and some things were in people's emails. And we use HelloSign for the signatures, but HelloSign doesn't really, they don't have a way to organize your contracts. And then, we started looking around, and the stuff that we found out there was, there's DocuSign that it's not actually for storing stuff, but people use it for that. And then there's all the crazy, really robust enterprise solutions that are hundreds of dollars a month.
Yeah.
And all I want to be able to say, hey, I want to find that contract we had with Exam Master from last year and just have it available.
Yes.
And so what I said, let me just sit down and I'm going to make an MVP of this. And I think I sat down like on a Friday evening, and by Saturday midday, I had something usable. And so I was talking to the team, and I was like, so why is it that I hadn't touched code for like a year. Why is it I could sit down and make this over the weekend? It's like a functional product, at least to a certain level. And our lead engineer, Michael, was like, yeah, sure, because you could do whatever you want. We were starting from scratch. It doesn't tie into anything. You're not at risk of breaking anything. And so that is like a super important element when we're thinking about legacy code. It's just, you have to account for thousands of things that already exist and talk to each other and tie into each other. And it does make things more difficult.
It does. You have the MVC architecture, you have all the methods, you have embedded queries. There's just so much that can go wrong if you're not careful. And we've had some of that happen with us. We have had some issues that really took some time to sort out, and that can be costly, unfortunately. But we also knew that we would be better off in the long run if we moved to an external partner in our situation, because we really wanted to focus our expertise on serving our customers and developing content. And that decision makes more sense today, even more than even when we first considered doing it.
Mm-hmm. You mean today because of the current situation?
No, just because we've really moved even more in a direction of content development. Now we have our own courseware that we've launched. We're actually using some external learning management systems to deliver some content. It's not even our own application. We're getting into a space that's beyond just board preparation. And we've developed this whole physician assistant admissions exam that doesn't even use our technology for the most part. Except for some back-end things. So it's really just, it makes more sense to have somebody else manage. It's like calling a plumber or somebody who's an expert. You could maybe go in and fix your sink or go in and change your, something in with your hot water heater. But if you have a professional do it, they're going to do it right. They're going to do it, efficiently, and then you focus on what you do best.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because that's like the exact conversation I have in my head. And the funny thing is, and I'm talking about my day-to-day work, there was just recently, there was a problem at the I don't remember what it was. It was like a broken toilet or something silly like that. And I was like, it would take me literally 10 minutes to fix that. But it's best that we call somebody to do it, because I have other important things that I need to get done in that time. So I think that's kind of the gist of it, is you need to focus on certain things. And although your internal team could probably very well handle some of these changes, well, maybe it's not worth it.
Right. Yeah. It's better to have somebody who does it all the time. Even with my car, you could maybe fix something, but your mechanic may have seen 100 of these things and dealt with them, whereas I'm going in and learning something for the first time. You got to look it all up and figure it out. And, it takes 8 hours when your mechanic can maybe do it in 30 minutes because he has seen the issue before and knows exactly what the problem is.
Yeah, it's exactly that.
Are you stuck at home climbing the walls when you should be hanging out with the community at the latest conference to get canceled? Are you wondering where to hear your JavaScript heroes like Amy Knight and Douglas Crockford and Chris Heilman? After the cancellations, I decided to put on a JavaScript conference for you, online. I invited my favorite folks from around the web and got them to come speak at an online event just for you. Go to jsremoteconf.com and check out our speakers and schedule. The conference is on May 14th and 15th. The call for proposals is open until March 31st. Come join us at an online conference that we guarantee will keep you safe and keep you informed. jsremoteconf.com.
So I'd like to go back to something you mentioned just a couple minutes ago. You said, you had made the decision to move to partnering with an external company to help you with the development side of things. Can you talk to me a little bit about, what things led to that conclusion?
We with partnering, what it would give us access to is more full stack development capability, for one. Okay, so we had a small team. We really didn't have strong front end capability. We didn't really, there was gaps when you look at the full spectrum of the full stack of development capability, from all, completely back end, completely front end, and sort of everything in between. We had some of that covered, but for us to have someone in-house that, or people or a team in-house that could cover all aspects of that would have been hugely expensive. And it would have been difficult to possibly to keep all of those folks busy all of the time. So for us, it seemed like it made more sense to work with a partner company who had full stack development capability that they could sort of scale up as we needed it. And then that way, we had that capability available to us without having to have that capability necessarily on our team. So that was one issue for us. One of the things that seemed attractive. Cost was certainly an issue to some degree. We were looking for the most, an efficient way to manage our development in a cost efficient manner. We wanted to have somebody that we felt we could work with. We have done some outsourcing in the past. We weren't completely satisfied with it. So it really does have to be a partnership, because there's, the whole product development cycle. There's, adding new features. There's really a lot of give and take, as between the team and the business owner, the product owner within the company. So it really does have to be a partnership. It's not just, you just test things off and then something comes back. it doesn't work that way. The other thing we had to deal with was trying to untether our existing team in a way that didn't provide any kind of challenges to the business in terms of disgruntled employees or other issues that were going to be leaving the company, and we wanted a clean handoff that was safe, that didn't risk something happening that might undermine our code. So that was sort of a tricky thing too, to try to manage that in a way that was safe and secure.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, all of that kind of happened successfully, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, it did.
And then, after that, what has been your experience? Have you felt happy with that decision? What have been the challenges of having an external partner?
We're happy with the decision. I think some of the challenges are germane just to software development anyway, so it's not necessarily because we have an external team versus an internal team. Getting through it can be frustrating when you have legacy issues in your code, and so that when issues emerge, it can take some time to resolve them, and that can be frustrating because you want to just move on. You want to be able to add new features. You want to be able to do some things to help your clients. You want to stay competitive. So, we have felt like we've kind of been in a slog working through a lot of legacy issues just to kind of keep things moving on an even keel, whereas we haven't really been able to advance the ball forward the way we would like, and we're, that's one challenge. Software estimations are another difficult thing, particularly when you are dealing with an external team, because they don't have all the experience with your particular code base. So for them to say, this would take 10 hours or 5 hours, or it's this many story points, or it's this level of complexity, they don't necessarily know that until they get into it. So estimation can be a really difficult thing under that type of scenario.
Yeah, one interesting thing about estimation, sorry to cut you off there, is when people ask me for estimates, we know they're estimates, but we're treating them essentially like quotes. And so the trouble is, as a partner, I don't want to say, hey, Matt, this is going to be 20 hours, and then it turns out to be 40, because then we're going to have a conversation about, all right, so who's going to absorb those extra 20 hours? Right?
Yes, right. Yes.
And I think, when you're an internal team and you go over budget, somebody's getting scolded. Hopefully nobody's getting fired, but there's no way the employee is going to be paying for it. So
right. That's right. Yes, it's a different world. Yeah, it's a different world. There has to be some trust. In other words, you want to trust that your external partner is dealing with things as efficiently as they can. They have the expertise, and that whatever time it takes to get it resolved is what it takes to get it resolved. That it's going to be done as quickly and as efficiently as reasonable. So there has to be some trust involved, but it does make budgeting difficult. It also can make the timing of certain things difficult because it's hard to know when certain things might be ready. So one of my experiences in my position as CEO is that a lot of challenges that folks face in the technology area and working with development teams is the communication. Communication is, to me, the single most important determinant of whether you're going to be successful in a task or a project or not. Having, very good, very explicit communication about what's expected, what's needed. I've seen so many instances where a dev person or dev team will be thinking of something in one way, whereas the product owner or the business owner or the customer thinks of it in a somewhat different way. And, you're asking somebody to build a particular type of house, and you're thinking it should be an A-frame, and they come back with, a raised ranch, and it's like, well, I thought this is what you said you wanted. So, the communication thing to me is a huge part of just working, either whether it's an internal team or an external team. And probably with an external team, you just need to make sure you have the ability to do that even more so, because there's more opportunity, I think, for disconnects to happen, because those disconnects can really hurt you.
Yeah, I think, this is something that we've discussed in the past on other episodes, but, it's just as much on the client as it is on the development team to communicate. And so if I have a client that's not communicating everything I need to know, I need to make sure that I'm pulling it up. right? And I'm saying, okay, I need to discuss these things, and we need to be very clear on them before we move forward. Unfortunately, not every development company out there does that, and so what you get is is not a good result. But a way of protecting yourself when you're on the on the product ownership side is just being super upfront and making sure that the engineering team building these things is well aware of all the details.
Yeah, we're using a new process. I mean, we've been using Pivotal Tracker and as a way to hand off work. What we're doing now is, and I think this last project that we're working on now, this scoring system, scoring access system, really spelling out the business specs in a way that hopefully makes everything very transparent as to what's expected and what's needed. So that's something that we're trying differently this time. And this is an opportunity to create something kind of new. It's not really dealing with legacy stuff, and hopefully that will make a better outcome for everybody.
Yeah. So one thing I find interesting about your business, Matt, is that you guys have several important stakeholders involved in that development process. So a lot of times what I see is we have one contact at the company, and that person is the product owner, and they make decisions to buy or not, and they do everything, right? But in your case, you have some business side people that are kind of pulling in the new requirements. You have somebody on the IT side who interacts with our team, and then I assume you're overseeing everything from a more strategic level and just ensuring that things are on budget, on time, and just going in the correct general direction. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, that's basically correct. I'm involved in the overall strategic direction, the overall choices about what we focus on. I try to stay out of the weeds as much as possible because I think that just would create an opportunity for confusion. You know what I mean? So I try to just rely on the folks who are involved day to day. And then also trying to make sure that internally we have a process for making sure that our priorities get done and there's not disconnects on our side. Because if we have disconnects on our side, that's going to carry over into possibly how we communicate with the external team.
Yeah, it's a double challenge because you have you have to coordinate several different people in different departments and roles to figure out what needs to get built, and then that needs to be relayed correctly to the development team. And we have to come back.
Now what we've done just recently is we have a project manager, senior manager now is in charge of our dev area. Her name's Judy. You know Judy.
I have met her. Yes.
Yes, and so she's not she doesn't have an engineering or technical background, but she has a lot of experience working with our clients, and she also has a lot of experience working with the technology team that we had in-house. So her job is really just to try to make sure there's no disconnects, that we're focusing on the things that we intend to focus on, just to make sure that we have our ducks in a row so that the things we need to get done, we get done in a reasonable time frame. Because we do have certain deadlines in some cases that we really do need to meet. Because of our external stakeholders, like the physician-assisted admissions exam, we have to have certain things ready by May 1st because that's when this thing opens up to the world, and we can't really go back and say we're not ready. That's just not an acceptable situation for us.
Right. Yeah. One thing that I'm just meditating on right now that came to mind is there's different roles that we've had more difficulty hiring for in the past. Marketing has been one of them. And part of the situation was, we'd bring, we're several years into our operation, we'd bring somebody new in, and we want them to hit the ground running. And the first issue we find is, so we brought in an expert in their area, but they don't have enough context to be able to do their job well. And so I imagine that would translate the same for development, right? So the problem with the marketing people was they would come in and they know all of these tools and frameworks for doing things that I don't know about, right? But they don't fully understand what our clients are all about and what they're looking for and their pains. And so that takes a while, that it could take them 6 months to even just get into a position where they have a good enough understanding of what our clients need so that they can do their job properly.
Right. Well, yeah, there's no question. One challenge we faced was that one of the key people in our IT team really didn't know our systems, our client-facing systems, all that well.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of the context issue, he understood technology, understood how to map things out, understood a lot of aspects of it, but he was lacking some context for things. So when decisions were made, they may have been made in a way where an assumption was made that was incorrect from a lack of knowledge of how the system works. And so that can be a challenge too. If you have somebody in there that doesn't understand your applications, they may miss something because they just don't realize it.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, you're just not taking advantage of a really valuable resource. I remember one time we had somebody had hired a designer from Blue Coding, and after like a day or two, the designer came back to me and said, "Hey, David, this client, it's not going to work out." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "He's kind of using me as a paintbrush, So he's sitting next to me and he's telling me, I want this green, I want this red, I want a line here."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not designing anything, I'm just drawing whatever he tells me. So,
right.
And so it's the same situation. It's if you have a development team, external or internal, that doesn't understand what's going on with your business, and you have to lay out, step by step, I want the user to be able to log in this way, using this and that, and I want this to be green and this red, and I want this on the bottom right corner. You're missing out on a lot of valuable experience and creativity and problem solving.
Right.
And however, if you have a partner that you've been working with, and this takes time to build, right? So after a year, we're going to be a lot better at our job than we were at the beginning. But once we have a very good understanding of what's going on in the business and what drives it and what the customers need and what the internal team needs, then we can start to make much better decisions around how things are built. When we raise our hand and say, "Hey, are you sure you want to do this? Maybe there's a better way," and so on.
Yeah. It makes a big difference because if you are boxed in, and I think, a lot of developers, not necessarily their fault, do lack context for things. They have something that's very much in front of them. They're given a task. They've got the specs. They may not understand the whole ecosystem that they're working with. And like my son, for example, works with Comcast. It's such a big company that the area that he works on in terms of from a software engineering perspective, it's a very narrow piece of the consumer-facing system that people use to either order cable service or change their cable service or swap their box or whatever it is. And he's dealing with a very small piece of that whole system. They have something like 600 engineers. I mean, it's a crazy number. But he does work with other teams to try to get more of that context because marketing, for example, there is trying to have certain kinds of things show up at certain points in the user workflow, and it's, and they've got their ideas about what they think people should be doing in order to promote their business. The engineers have their ideas about what works well and what doesn't work well, and you can really get some disconnects.
Yeah. So, and then another thing is, it just comes from the company culture inside your company and also the companies from which your employees came. So we've seen that. We've seen, we bring in a new employee. In our company, we expect people to raise their hand and let us know when there's a better way to do something. If you see me doing something stupid, I want you to let me know, "Hey, David, you're you're doing your finances wrong. You're doing your marketing, whatever it is, and here's a better way of doing it." But we found that some people come in and they don't feel comfortable doing that because that's not the way that they worked at their previous company. Their previous company was more of a, "Hey, just keep your head down and do your job."
Yeah, right.
So part of it is just making sure that whether your team is internal or external, we make it acceptable for people to raise their hands and bring up issues and challenge assumptions, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the assumptions can kill you. They really can. It's good to challenge assumptions because, we make assumptions because we have to, just even as human beings, to get through the day. Otherwise, we'd be having to think about everything. But when you're talking about processes or things that you're working on or features or whatever it is, the assumptions can really kill you.
Yeah, that's right. So one last thing I'd like to ask you is,
sure.
With your experience, you've been through, first outsourcing the work, then bringing it in-house, and then outsourcing again, and different measures of that in between. When would you say is a good time to have things built in-house? When would you say is a good time to partner up with another company and help you do that?
That's a tough question. I think it depends to some degree on what it is that you're building. It may be that, with working with an external team, they have likely a different mindset than an internal team because they're not part of the company. They work for a different company. They're working for a different company, whereas your internal team, they're your employees. You can manage them much more granularly in a way than you can in an external team. I think it just depends in part on how much flexibility you need with your team. How much do you need them to contribute to the evolution of whatever it is you're working on? I think it really just depends on how flexible you need your team to be and how much control you want to have over your team as to whether you should be in-house or whether what you're doing is something that can reasonably be handed off to an external team, knowing that, they're going to care about you, but they are not the same as your employees. Another consideration might be mission critical stuff. If you have something that is just critical to the core of your business, you're going to at least think twice about handing that off, because your business depends on it.
Yeah. And that's one of the actually one of the selling points I have. When people come up to us and say, "Hey, this other developer is quoting us less," and I'll say, "Yeah, sure," because we're a team of like 10 people, and that what that means is that when one of us is sick, there will always be somebody to take over, and there's a couple people that know what's going on, and so we're it's just some redundancy built in. And I think the same applies to having it in-house. You don't want to have one employee that's the only person that knows how to do everything, otherwise it just gets unbalanced.
Yes, that's a definite, single point of failure is definitely a risk to the business too. Yeah, no question about it. So for us, I think, given where we are today, outsourcing makes sense. I think you have to have some ownership of things internally. You have to take responsibility for, determining the direction, the scope of what you're doing, and then having somebody else help you make that happen.
Great. Well, I think we are potentially running out of time.
Okay.
I wanted to take advantage and ask you if you had any recommendations or picks, anything, you come across, a tool, a book, something that you think the audience might find interesting, or just something that you really enjoy.
I guess one of the things that I've worked with is I can't say a book specifically, but I think from my perspective as a CEO, it's just helpful to understand sort of the overall software development process and understanding, the challenges with estimating, the challenges with working with a team. For me, it's just knowing enough that I can speak the language of the folks that I'm working with without having to get too deep into it. So for me, over years, my background was political science. My background was, potentially to go in the foreign service, Latin American studies, wasn't a technology background at all. So I've had to, as a CEO, I've had to learn as I've gone in terms of working with technology, working with developers. And I think the more that I understand the process, the better leader I can be, because I can sort of speak the language. I can understand where folks are coming from. I feel like I can have a little bit more credibility than if I'm just sort of like, get it done. I don't care how you do it, do it. That kind of an attitude, I don't think serves very well. So I would say, from my perspective as a CEO of a small company, trying to be able to understand what's involved with software development at a reasonably deep level so that I can work with teams and understand what they're telling me and relate to them.
Yeah, it also makes the development teams work much easier when they're talking to somebody that understands in general terms what's going on.
Yeah, it does, and you get a little bit more respect, I think, too, that way.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good chatting with you, David, as always.
Yeah, I always enjoy it.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess we'll see you all in another episode of Outsourcing Oasis.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.